First of all, I want to go ahead and apologize for not uploading yesterday. I do believe that's the first day this entire month I haven't uploaded. If I was to upload that day, it would have been a really rushed video, and I decided that I didn't want to do that. But with that out of the way, let's talk about today's video, which is going to be about characters who are almost definitely going to return in Injustice 3. So I'm going to start this video by laying out characters that I don't think very many people would argue with. These are the characters who are core to the Injustice world, who I think will show up in the next game, and probably the next game after that, and maybe even the next game after that. Starting off with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, Green Arrow, Cyborg, Green Lantern, and Supergirl. The most questionable person throughout this entire list has probably been Supergirl. The rest of them, though, are pretty core to what Injustice is. It's, it's the main Justice League members. I do think Supergirl will continue to be a part of that group because Supergirl is obviously quite a popular TV show, and I don't see a reason for them to walk away from the character, so I'm just going to consider her a part of that core. Next, I'm going to go over the characters who I think are almost definitely not going to return, starting with Grodd. The reason I'm going to say Grodd, not only because of what happens to him in the story, he's also not an insanely popular character. Obviously, there's a lot of Flash fans out there who love the Grodd character like myself, but I don't think the demand for the character is so high that they're going to need to bring him back. Robin, I think Robin won't be included because so far it looks like we're going down a track record of just getting all of the Bat family members into the game. So in the first game we had Dick Grayson, in DLC we had Batgirl, in Injustice 2 we had Robin, who is Damian Wayne, and then as DLC we had Red Hood. The way I think we're going to get it in Injustice 3 is that we're going to get Red Robin on the main roster, and then for DLC, hopefully, we'll get Batwoman. That's at least the way I would do it. Moving on to Poison Ivy, I don't think she'll show up in the game because I don't think she'll have a significant role in the story. Most of the characters we saw return from Injustice 1 were characters that were really core to the story, and I don't think Ivy was one of those characters, so I don't think she's going to transition into Injustice 3. Next of all is Brainiac. Again, this is a character with a very specific fate at the end of Injustice 2, but I still don't think he'll show up in Injustice 3, but that's not the only reason I don't think he'll show up in Injustice 3. I just don't think he'll show up because I don't think a lot of people loved the character this time around. Don't get me wrong, no one hated Brainiac. I think most of us enjoy his moveset, think he looks cool, he's got cool animations, his character was solid in the story, but I don't think anyone's clamoring for another Brainiac appearance. This next one is going to be a little bit more sad, and that's Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate is, of course, a very popular character. His moveset was very interesting this time around, but I don't think they're going to make him return in Injustice 3 because I think there's a lot of characters in that role, Justice League Dark type character, that they probably want to expand upon in the next game, but without Dr. Fate. I think there's going to be different characters in that magic user role, for example Constantine, who show up in Injustice 3, and I don't think we're also going to get Dr. Fate alongside of a character like that. Next up is Black Adam. I don't think Black Adam will return because Black Adam has already shown up in 2 different games now, and I didn't expect him to show up in Injustice 2 because I didn't think his presence was called for, and I don't think his presence will be called for again, especially because of the lack of Shazam. That being said, around that time we should be getting a lot of news about the Shazam movie, so maybe that's going to demand for Shazam to return, and then because of that, perhaps Black Adam. This is the pick of this entire video that I'm least sure about, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he will not return. I don't think Scarecrow will return either, mainly because his impact in the story was fairly low. I don't think they're going to be able to justify a slot for him in the story again, and he's not a super highly demanded character, and there was nothing more to be desired from his moveset. His moveset was very complete, and I don't see a reason to return to him design-wise. Next up is Firestorm. I don't think Firestorm will return, and if he does return, I don't think it will be Jason Rush. I think what's more likely if Firestorm was to return, that they'll probably find a reason to adjust his moveset in a big way. Perhaps maybe instead of having Jason Rush, they could have Jefferson Jackson or Ronnie Raymond jump into the role of Firestorm, and that way they can do whatever they want with the new moveset of Firestorm. But anything outside of that, I'm going to go ahead and say that this version of Firestorm does not return in Injustice 3. Next up is Cheetah. I don't think Cheetah will show up in Injustice 3 because of her impact in the story and the low demand for the character. Now, that's it. I've laid out all the characters that I think will return and all the characters who I think will not return. Now, those of you with a keen eye will notice there's quite a few characters I did not talk about that I will proceed to talk about now who are somewhere in the middle, and then I'm going to go out on a limb on each of them and give reasons as to why I think they're either not going to show up or that they will show up. Starting off with Deadshot. Now, Deadshot is going to be pretty important for the upcoming DCEU films, mainly because he's being played by Will Smith, who's of course a very big actor. Being able to utilize that character is a really big deal for the DCEU, and possibly implementing that character continually throughout the Injustice world is going to be pretty valuable as well. That being said, I don't think he was used particularly well in the Injustice story, and they probably will want to use the Deathstroke character at some point because of his inclusion in the DCEU as well. That gives them more reason to use that character because a lot of people are going to be more aware of him than they otherwise would have, and I don't think you can have both of those characters in the same game. I'm going to go ahead and say that Deathstroke will replace Deadshot in Injustice 3, and for that reason, I don't think Deadshot will show up. Next up is Swamp Thing. I think Swamp Thing actually has a fairly strong chance of showing up in Injustice 3. When you create a fighting game, you're really looking for multiple different types of movesets to show up in the game. One of them is the grappler moveset, and I think Swamp Thing has one of the most interesting grappler movesets that has ever been seen in a fighting game, at least in my opinion. I think there's a lot of space to design his moveset that they didn't necessarily explore, and I think given more time, in perhaps a sequel, Injustice 3, I think the additions they would make to that moveset would be really compelling, maybe even so compelling that a player like me, who has historically never played a grappler, move over to Swamp Thing. And for that reason, I'm going to put him on the main roster of Injustice 3. Next up is Captain Cold. I think I'm going to say a lot of similar things about Captain Cold. You're going to need a Flash villain in Injustice 3, just because, you know, you're going to have the Flash in Injustice 3. There's no world where you don't. I think Captain Cold is a good slot for that, but there's a lot of other Flash villains that could probably show up over Captain Cold, so that's not to say that Captain Cold's the only Flash villain. Mirror Master is another good pick that they could throw in, but we did have two Flash villains in this game, so I don't see a reason to not have him and Mirror Master. Captain Cold's moveset was so interesting, but it doesn't feel quite complete. Again, I feel like there's some more area that they can expand upon there, little adjustments that they could make that could really end up bringing out the character in a big way in Injustice 3. Remember, every character from Injustice 1 that went over to Injustice 2 had slight adjustments to their moveset to make it more compelling, and I think they could do things like that to Captain Cold's moveset in Injustice 3 to make the character feel more fluid and more enjoyable. Next up is Harley Quinn. I'm pretty sure Harley Quinn is going to show up in Injustice 3. Harley Quinn is a very fun character to play. She's a really fun character in general, just from a character perspective. A lot of people love the Harley Quinn character, and I don't see her moving away from the series anytime soon. That being said, I don't have her on the guaranteed returning because there is a slight possibility she doesn't show up. But again, I do think it's very likely. Next up is Blue Beetle. This is again a character that I feel like was so close to having an amazing moveset. Obviously, there's slight adjustments being made to characters like Blue Beetle, Swamp Thing, and all of that as we speak. Every single new patch adjusts these characters ever so slightly. Swamp Thing, in fact, got a massive amount of changes in the most recent patch, but Blue Beetle is a character I think that needs a more fundamental change. I think that his trait is inherently counterintuitive. I don't like traits like this, things that allow you to switch stances. I really didn't like Wonder Woman's trait in the first game. I don't like traits that switch stances in general. I think it's a really bad design flaw that NetherRealm continues to try to push in their games for some reason, and I really hope it's something they're willing to walk away from with Blue Beetle in Injustice 3, and I do think he will show up because he is an incredibly popular character. That being said, his representation in the movies is fairly lacking, and of course also in the TV shows, mainly because he's just an expensive character to do, but I think he's one of those characters that's popular enough to justify his slot. Also, again, there's so much interesting things you could do with Blue Beetle's moveset, especially if you gave him a new trait. Look at the difference between Wonder Woman in Injustice 1 and the difference between Wonder Woman and Injustice 2. I want to see that massive of a shift between Blue Beetle in Injustice 2 and Blue Beetle in Injustice 3, because you would have to move that trait away, give him a new trait, hopefully not a random one like Wonder Woman's, and kind of make a amalgamation of a moveset. The moveset that he has while he has his blades out, and the moveset he has while he has his cannon out, and kind of combining those two movesets in a way that you don't have to switch between the two. Next up is Bane. Bane has now shown up in 2 Injustice games. I don't think Bane will make a third appearance. The reason I don't think that is because, again, when you make a fighting game, you have very limited options. You need to make a few grapplers because grapplers present an entirely new way of playing the game, or at least a different way of playing the game than most characters. And that's one of the reasons we saw Bane in Injustice 2. That being said, there's a lot of characters in the DC world who would better suit, or not necessarily better suit, but who would also suit a grappler moveset, who I think probably deserve their spot in the spotlight, especially considering that Bane has already had 2 different Injustice games. I think a character likely to take his slot is Killer Croc. This next character is Catwoman. This is the one I am least sure about. I'm gonna go ahead and say that Catwoman is not going to be in Injustice 3. The reason I say this is because there are a lot of characters I've put on the returning roster, for example Supergirl, who give you a lot of the same stuff that you get from Catwoman, a companion for Batman, more specifically a female companion for Batman, a rushdown moveset. Catwoman's moveset in Injustice 2 feels very strange to me. It feels like they don't really know what to do with Catwoman. She has like a million different strings and only a handful of them are competitively viable. I just feel like they kind of lost with Catwoman from a design perspective, and I would hope that this is something they're willing to return to in the future, but not something that I want to see in Injustice 3 unless they do a massive overhaul with the character. Next up is Darkseid. I don't think Darkseid will return in Injustice 3 unless he's the main villain of the game. So I'm going to put him in a question mark category. Atrocitus, I do not think will return in Injustice 3. I think it's more likely that we get some type of other Green Lantern villain. In the first game, we had the Yellow Lantern Sinestro. In the second game, we had the Red Lantern Atrocitus. Hopefully this means in the next game in Injustice 3, maybe we get a character like, oh my god, I always forget this character's name, but the Orange Lantern or something like that just shows up in the story just to fight Green Lantern momentarily, but it makes his way onto the main roster. And finally, the Joker. I'm almost 100% sure Joker will show up in the game just because Joker is a very popular character, he's easily marketable, and I don't see a reason to not have him in the game, other than of course his current role in the story, which is, being deceased. This does not disclude him from showing up in the game, as he could show up through flashbacks, hallucination sequences, any other remote thing. Maybe they do some type of Flashpoint story, who knows, but I do think Joker will show up on the main roster. I actually totally forgot to talk about Black Canary, but thanks to the power of editing, I can do that right now. I think Black Canary will show up in Injustice 3, mainly because I don't think they're going to want to split up the pair of Green Arrow and Black Canary again. In Injustice 2, they had a lot of really good dialogue moments in the story, and there's a lot of really nice references between the two characters throughout the rest of the game through intro dialogues and clash quotes. I don't see them going away from that. Plus, the Black Canary character is really cool. It's an extra female in the game, which I think is important to a lot of people. I personally like playing as female characters. It's one of the reasons I played Black Canary for quite a little bit after the launch of the game, and I think the character is going to do nothing but rise in popularity because of the CW shows and inevitably the DCEU. That's been it for me. There you go. There are all my returning characters. I don't actually have it in front of me. I don't know what characters I ended up showing as my returning characters and what characters I ended up showing that I cut. Actually, I do know the characters I cut because I haven't edited this video yet, but right now on the screen there should be an image of the characters I cut, the characters I'm not sure about, which should only be one, which is Darkseid. If he's the main villain, he's in the game. If he's not the main villain, he's not in the game. And you guys should also be able to see all the characters that I expect to see returning in Injustice 3. I know it's a long list, so I'm a little bit worried about that. But remember, there was a long list of characters who did return in Injustice 2. Regardless, thank you guys so much for watching this video. My name has been Bilbzy, and I will see you in tomorrow's video.